Now, hearing about adults having near-death experience is amazing enough. But it's even more amazing when you hear of children who have near-death experiences. Children who have had these near-death experiences give information that there's no way that they could have this information. They speak in terms that, where did you get that? You know, it's really incredible. Now, there's an amazing book out that's called Heaven is for Real by Todd Burpess. And it's a true story about a 4-year-old boy of a small town Nebraska minister, a pastor. And this boy, as he's undergoing an emergency surgery, he dies. He's unconscious, his heart stops. But he survives, and when he comes home, he begins talking about what he experienced. How he saw the doctors working on him. How he saw his father praying in the waiting room. He had this out-of-body detail that his family didn't know what to believe when he was coming up with these details one after another. Colton, that's his name, said that he met his miscarried sister who he knew nothing about. And he also met his great-grandfather who died 30 years before he was born. And he told impossible to know details that there's no way the boy could have known these things. And then he describes how really big God is and how big his chair is, you know, and how the Holy Spirit shoots down power into people. Now again, this is a 4-year-old telling the story, right? Now the story is actually told through the eyes of the father, but with Colton's words interjected. And disarmingly, the simple message is that heaven is a real place, that Jesus loves children, and be ready, there is coming a last battle from a 4-year-old. Now, to be sure, near-death experiences is pleasant for those who have an experience of heaven. But not every near-death experience is a pleasant one. Some have reported to get a glimpse of hell or some other place that's not heaven. And when they return to earthly life, boy, did they change their lifestyle. For instance, they report being kind of sucked into a void, kind of even an absence of experience, kind of like a dead, numbing experience. And a lot of these negative near-death experiences often involve being dragged into a pit by some kind of creature or something. For instance, Evelyn Hazel, she's a London-based art historian. She fought for her life against meningitis. She said, I reached the critical stage of the illness, and I was hovering between life and death. And then she said, all of a sudden, I felt this real struggle with this creature. At one point, it was like a 3-legged being pulling me downwards. And I struggled. I knew if I gave up, I would be lost forever. Now, she survived, and she became a lot more charitable person after that, but she never forgot that experience. Another example is Howard Storm, not Howard Stern. We know that some of his things may be in hell, but Howard Storm, okay? Before his near-death experience, Howard was a professor of art at Northern Kentucky University. He was an atheist, and he also was not a pleasant man. He was very rude to people, and he despised organized religion and anyone who practiced it. He always kept on putting them down. The only thing that was real was things that you could touch and see. That's the only thing he had faith in. And he considered all belief systems associated with religion just as fantasies and crutches for people. Beyond what science said, nothing else exists. Well, on June 1st, 1985, at the age of 38, Howard Storm had a negative near-death experience because of a perforation in his stomach. His heart stopped and all that. Well, his negative experience changed him forever. When he returned to health, he was so immensely changed that he resigned his post as professor. He entered a theological seminary and he became a minister. How about that? Now, there's been a considerable amount of research done on these near-death experienced people. And there are those in medicine and science that try to explain this phenomenon in medical terms, but they can't explain the positive effects it has on the people who've had these experiences. The majority of people report things like this. After I came back, I cried off and on for about a week because I had to live in this world after seeing that one. Another one said, when I came back, I brought with me some of those wonderful feelings I had over there. They lasted for several days, and even now I feel them sometimes. Another one said, the feeling was so indescribable. It stayed with me in a way I will never forget it. I think of it very often. And the facts of these people are, many report that this experience has broadened their way of looking at life. Many people know now that their life has to be dedicated to cultivate love with those around them. And the vast majority do not fear death anymore. And they do a lot of good while they have the second chance to live here on earth. Now, these are the experts, I guess, of what happens after death. But let's consider the communion of saints. Okay? Let's consider the communion of saints. It's our Catholic belief that we are still connected with those who have gone on before us. That people are not gone at all. People are here in a more profound way, connected with us. And the saints, meaning the people who have died and are now with God, they're nearer to us than generally we are aware of. If you've seen that movie, The Sixth Sense, right? The boy who sees dead people. I always kind of scare, the young people. I was saying, this room is filled with dead people. Not the person next to you. And they go, oh no, there's spirits in this room. We believe that. We believe in the spiritual realities of God. Now, being in communion with us, then it shouldn't surprise us that they could communicate with us. That they can communicate with us. St. Teresa of the Little Flower said, I will spend my heaven doing good for those on earth. Okay? Now, after death communication of a loved one is more common than many people think. In fact, many of you may have had an after-death communication with a loved one, but maybe you don't want to share it too much because people think, I'm a little strange or something. But I'm sure many of you have had them. Now, after-death communication, again, there's a whole bunch of researchers out there doing research on this too. And they say it could occur in many different ways. It's near after-death communication, in a dream, in a scent, you smell the person, in an audible voice, in a particular physical event, like maybe lights flickering on and off, or something always kind of moved in one direction, or a touch, or even a vision. Now here's some examples. Philip, he's a psychiatrist, and his daughter Tina died when she was 15 years old in a car crash. Tina had many friends all over the city, and Philip didn't realize how popular she was until after, she died. People came from all over, and the good she did at high school and beyond, it was just incredible. And one of her friends told Philip that at Sunday school, in their youth group, Tina said, if I die soon, I don't want people to be sad. I want a big party to be thrown. Well, a friend reminded Philip of that, and so that's what Philip did. Right after her funeral, he had a big party for all his friends at his house and in his backyard. About 300 people came to this party. And there's wall-to-wall people. And Philip reports, he says, I was walking down the hallway downstairs, and I heard Tina say, I love you, Dad. I wheeled around, he said, because it was an audible external voice. He says, I'm a board-certified psychiatrist. I'm not giving in to hearing things that are not there. Having lived, he says, my professional career as a hard-headed scientific person, I did not expect this. But all I know, that experience did an awful lot to lighten my load. My grief was lessened, I know I did not lose my daughter. How about Janet? She's a nurse in North Dakota. Her 4-year-old son, Toby, died of brain hemorrhage. And about a year after he died, Janet had this very vivid dream. She said, I was on a riverbank, and across the river, I saw Toby. He was dressed in his striped t-shirt and blue jeans and all that. You know, it was beautiful on the other side. Flowers and grass were up to his waist, and there were birds and trees, and it looked so very pleasant. And I tried my best to get across that river, but because of the depth and the current, I couldn't. And then Toby told me, Mom, you cannot come across now. You cannot come across. You will not make it across. And she says, the thing was, he looked like my little boy, but he was speaking to me like a mature person, like I was the child. And he was calling me. And he said, Mom, look I am just fine. Relax. Relax, Mom. I am just fine. And the dream was over. And she says, I don't know what that dream was all about, but it helped me with my grieving and my consolation. And then Peter, he's a salesman in Florida. His daughter April died when she was only 20 years old. And he had this experience about 6 months after her death. He said, one night I was sitting up in bed, not sleeping, I was sitting up, just finishing reading, and I looked up and April was in the doorway. And she was in a white robe, and I could see her hands and her forearms, her neck, her shoulders, her face. Her skin tone was perfect. Her hair was just beautiful. And I just kept on saying, April, I love you. April, I love you. And she says, Dad, I know. Dad, I know. And I got up and I tried to hug her. And she moved back and said, Dad, you cannot touch me. You cannot touch me. But I love you. I know, Dad, I know. Are you in heaven? Asked Peter. Yes, Dad, I'm in heaven, she said. Well, what's it like? And she always had a sense of humor. And she says, you know, Dad, remember on TV you used to watch, the lives of the rich and famous? Well, compared to heaven, that's poverty. And then she said, Dad, I gotta go now. No, I know, Dad, but I gotta go. And she backed out of the room and faded away. Well, he had a very good night's sleep that night, and all the nights after that. Now, Elizabeth is a private investigator in the Southeast. She had this encounter 8 years after her grandmother died at the age of 98. She said, I was sitting in the chair in the nighttime, nursing my newborn baby. All of a sudden, I felt a cool breeze brush across me. And my grandmother's perfume, the scent of her perfume was in the air. She wore this perfume called Blue Waltz, a really old brand. But it was in the air. I could smell it. And the room was filled with this fragrance, and I knew that she was there. I had this overwhelming sense of her love, and my little boy stopped nursing. And he turned his head and looked where I thought my grandmother was standing. And he was making these cooing sounds for about the 15 minutes that I felt her presence. And I told her, thank you for coming. I really appreciate your love. And I know that she was very excited because this little baby was her first great-grandchild. Now, are these people crazy? They're having these experiences? Or how about Hannah in Utah? 6 weeks after her mother died at 82, she had this experience. She says, I couldn't sleep, so I got up and I did a couple chores around the house, sweeping things up, dusting downstairs. And then I sat in the chair in the front room, and I was thinking about my mother and feeling that I do all that I could when she was in her last agony. And suddenly, she walked into the room. And I was amazed. And the first thing I noticed, that she was walking. Because you see, 10 years before the end of her life, she had both legs amputated because of diabetes. But she walked into the room, right up to me, sat on the edge of the chair, put her arm around me, says, Hannah, darling, you've been like an angel to me. Thank you very much. Don't feel sad. Don't grieve over me. I'm just fine. And there's a radiance about her, she said. I felt love. I felt peace. And then my mother got up and walked around to the other side of the chair, and she said, don't worry about me. I'm very happy." And she kissed me on the cheek, and then she left. But it was so real. I felt my mother's touch on my shoulder. I felt her lips on my cheek. "It's something sacred," she said. And then George tells this story about his infant son. George and his wife had gone to a church meeting and left their infant baby in the nursery. After the meeting, George heard his wife scream from the nursery. He rushed in. The little baby boy died while in the crib. He died in his sleep. Well, the death nearly destroyed the couple, as many times the case may be. Night after night, they would go to bed and toss and turn, many sleepless nights. They just could not go to sleep. They could not communicate. They were just, what did we do wrong? They were blaming themselves. And one of those difficult nights, George said, he stretched out in bed without much hope of getting a decent night's sleep. And as he was laying there, sleep wouldn't come. And he looked up and he saw a large, strong man standing at the foot of his bed. He was dressed in a white long robe, he said, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through me. And it's funny, I wasn't afraid. This man in my bedroom, but I wasn't scared. And the man spoke to George saying, "Don't you know me? I'm Chris, your son. You brought me into this world, but I needed to stay only a short time. I've been spared from the adversities that the world dispenses and have now entered eternity free from error. You have nothing to fear, nothing over which to have anguish. Sleep well and fret not. We shall see one another one day." The man disappeared, and George felt he knew that he wasn't dreaming. He just seen his infant son all grown up from eternity. He was filled with peace, and he slept well that night and never had a problem sleeping after that. He was filled with peace. Well, here's a favorite of mine. There was once a little kindergarten boy named Sam, and he was totally full of life, a very happy child. And he had a very close relationship with his grandfather. His grandfather used to babysit him, used to take him to the playground, take him to ball games, to stores, to restaurants. Many times they used to dress like each other, the same t-shirt and jeans and all that, baseball cap. They were like buddies. Sam used to call him Pa. Pa, my Pa. Well, when Pa became ill and hospitalized with lung cancer, Sam's mother worried about how is 5-year-old Sam going to take this, But he was very positive through the whole situation. He insisted on going to the hospital. He wanted to sit and talk with Pa and read even when Pa was declining. And then Sam was there right up until his grandfather died. He was there at the moment of death. And Sam missed his grandfather after that. In his grief every night, he would walk over to his bedroom window and say his prayers and press his face against the window, and tears would come down. He said, "I miss you, Pa. I miss you, Pa." And then he would climb into bed. And that went on for about a week, that grieving. And then one morning, he seemed to be fine. His mother asked, "Well, are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I had a dream about Pa. And Pa's in heaven, and he's all right." And Sam never cried again. Well, Sam's mother had a very difficult time. She was very close to her father, too. And from time to time, she really grieved and just broke out sobbing and all that. And one day she was at the supermarket, and she was in the parking lot, and she saw a red pickup truck, one like her father had. And, the thought comes, "Oh, Dad's here." And she caught herself, and of course he's not here. And she started crying really uncontrollably. And little Sam got out of his car seat and went into his mother's lap and said, "You really miss Pa, don't you?" "Mm-hmm, I do." "But Mom, you got to believe that he's with us. Pa's right with us, Mommy. He's right here. And besides, he's not suffering anymore. And he's with Grandma, and he's with Aunt Bee, and with all his friends right now. Mom, he's living with the angels and with God, Mom. He's really happy. So don't be sad." And Sam's mother thought, "This is incredible. My son consoling me like this." She was amazed how her son could speak so easily about her father, his grandfather, and with such conviction about the afterlife. So a few weeks later, Sam's mother was preparing supper, and Sam was in the dining room coloring the Spider-Man comic book, and Sam's mom heard from Sam, "I love you too." And she kind of chuckled and put her head into the dining room and says, "Honey, you only say, I love you too, if someone says, I love you first." And Sam says, "I know. Pa told me he loved me, so I said, I love you too." "Oh, Pa talks to you?" "Oh yeah, he tells me he loves me every day. And what's more, Mommy, he says he's telling you, but you're not listening." And good boy, isn't that incredible? Well, my last story summarizes everything. Roberta and Bernice were best friends for over 30 years. The kids grew up together. They went to social things, to church together. When the kids were grown, Roberta got a job with an evening shift. So she worked nights, and quitting time was 11 o'clock, and she was home by 11:20. And at 11:30 every night, the phone would ring. It would be her friend Bernice. And the ladies would talk into the night about how the day went. They would laugh and talk about the problems. And Bernice was a very prayerful, spiritual person, while Roberta, as well, she was kind of skeptical about the whole thing. So at one point, Bernice became really sick with complications from her diabetes, and she was hospitalized. And because of Roberta working the night shift, she couldn't really get over to see Bernice all that much. But still, at 11:30, Roberta had permission to call her best friend, and the calls continued. But then Bernice's health went downhill, and the phone calls ceased. And Roberta really missed talking to her lifelong friend. She talked to her every day for 30 years. Well, at one point, Bernice's daughter, Tina, came and told Roberta that her mom is really slipping fast, and it would just be a matter of time. Won't be much longer. Well, one evening, Roberta came home from work, and at 11:30, the phone rang. Didn't ring for weeks, but it rang, and she picked it up. It was Bernice. And what's more, she sounded great. And she said, "Wow, Roberta, you should see it in my room. There's angels all around. This is really beautiful. This is incredible." And then Bernice told Roberta that she was fine and should be home soon. Well, Roberta, when she hung up, she was filled with joy. Wow, my friend is all right. She couldn't wait to see her. And the next day, Tina, Bernice's daughter, came over to tell the sad news that her mom passed into eternity at 11:30 the night before. And Roberta couldn't believe it. Wait a minute, I spoke to her. She said she was fine. She said she was going home. And then it dawned on Roberta, yep, her friend was completely fine now, and she was home indeed. And so to answer the question, what happens after death? We go home. Thank you.